All right, it is almost 6:05, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We welcome you to our second evening of our Power Up series, hosted by the Ready for 100 Chicago Collective, which is a team of organizations across Chicago who want to really focus on not just getting to 100% clean energy, but figure out how we get there and making sure that that's done with community input. So thanks for joining us tonight as we talk about saving energy as well as saving money as a part of this transition. Last week we talked about long-term jobs, and we have two more events coming up in this series as well. So we are really, really excited to have you all join us, and we encourage you to use the chat to tell us where you're joining us from and who's in the room. So if you could go ahead and drop your name and where you're calling from in the city into the chat, that would be really great. I can go ahead and model that here. Okay, and also you can use share, just share your name and what part of town you're joining us from. Awesome. Great. Great. Cason, would you be willing to throw our slides on? And also, Andrew, would you be willing to share our sign-in survey with everyone? In addition to signing in via the chat box, we also want to make sure that we do our best to capture who's in the room here tonight. Again, this is our second evening of our Power Up series, and we are really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So tonight we are going to be hearing from a set of panelists from three great organizations doing some solid work here in the Chicagoland area and beyond. And after talking with our panelists, we'll have a chance to actually just put the spotlight on all of you and say, hey, what matters as it relates to this clean energy transition related to saving money and saving energy. The journey to 100% clean energy is not linear, and all cities across the country are trying to figure out the best path forward for themselves. And so tonight is our chance to figure it out for Chicago. All right, or at least one opportunity to figure it out for Chicago. You can go to the next slide, Cason. Just a quick recap on Zoom. I know some folks are more familiar than others. Two things to really pay attention to. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you have a mute button and a video button. Looks like a camcorder or something. That's how you unmute yourself, as well as start or stop your video. And then also to chat, if you see people are writing things in the chat box, you're going to look for the little dialogue or conversation bubble there, as well as at the bottom of your screen. All right. We encourage you also, since we'll be in gallery view and listening to our panelists, we want to be able to know who's in the room, and so that we can have something more of a conversation, even though we're in this virtual space. We encourage you to rename yourself using this rename feature. So you can go to the bottom, click participant, and right now it's an icon with like 22 or 23 people next to it, or the numbers 23. And at the top, you'll see your name, and on the right side, you can click rename, or there will be like a blue button with a caret with more. Check out how to rename yourself there and share your name and your personal pronouns so that we know how to address you in this conversation. All right, next. All right. Here are just a few agreements for our online space tonight. As I mentioned, it is not just a webinar, not just an opportunity to listen to some great speakers, but also this will be an opportunity to be interactive. So we'll have an opportunity in breakout rooms or small groups to really get this conversation flowing. And so in order to do that, we have a few agreements or some suggestions for this evening that we'd love for you to try on. The first is to be ready to participate, or it's actually number 2 on here, and unmute when you're done as well as speaking. That pairs well with number 5. It's not as easy to read everybody's body language, of course, in this space. So when you're done speaking, particularly in your small group, go ahead and say, I'm done, or give some acknowledgement to the fact that you finished your thought so that nobody interrupts you in the middle of it either. And then I think that also takes us well into number 6, which is be mindful of your airtime. This is a jam-packed 2 hours, and we want to make sure that we really have a chance to hear from everybody in the room. So be mindful of how much you are speaking when we are sharing space. All right, let's keep it going. All right, so many of you are very familiar with the Ready for 100 Chicago campaign, either because you have been involved with the coalition, maybe you have been a volunteer and you've helped us circulate petitions or show up to City Hall when we could do things like that. But for those who are newer, would love to give you a recap, and for those who are rejoining the conversation, would love to share some of our great successes so far. So we are continuing to build the momentum that we kickstarted in 2017 and 2018. This is a conversation, again, not just about reaching 100% clean energy for the sake of doing that, but really doing so in a way that brings benefit to communities. And so this is a conversation that builds upon the thought leadership and the community voice around racial equity and economic justice. And then last year, a group of us, as part of the Ready for 100 Chicago collective, we actually wrote and passed a resolution in City Council. And so in that resolution, we named 3 particular things. That a transition plan should be written, and it should be written with community input and participation. And then 2 milestones were actually articulated. The first, that we should have a clean energy economy for the entire city by 2035, and that at least buildings should be powered by clean energy by that time, and that by 2040, our buses should be an electric bus fleet. And so we know that this is ambitious, and we know that these decisions won't happen overnight. So thanks for being a part of the conversation to really figure out the nitty-gritty on how we get there. All right, so that takes us to this evening and our Power Up series. I'm gonna pass it over to Pat, who's gonna tell you a bit more about tonight's theme about saving energy, saving money, and clean energy.
Thank you very much, Kyra. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I coming through loud and clear? Looks good. All right, good. Well, thanks everyone. So our panelists that we're gonna speak to in just a minute are gonna go into a lot more detail about this topic, about why it's so important and what we can do to address it. But I wanted to provide a high-level overview because it really is central to our clean energy future. Everyone needs and deserves power, heat, and water, but today everyone doesn't have affordable and reliable access to them. When you look across Chicago, what you see is that many Chicagoans experience what's called energy burden or utility bill burden, meaning that they're spending 5, 10, sometimes even 20% or more of their household income on their utility bills every single month. About 90% of low-income Chicagoans face what we call energy insecurity, meaning they have to choose between paying their utility bills and paying for essentials like rent, groceries, and medicine. And many thousands have their utilities shut off each year because they fall behind on their bills. And so that brings us to kind of the solutions. How can we both save money, save energy, and create an equitable future? And we think energy efficiency can really be central to that. Energy efficiency is the ability to perform the same tasks using less energy, and it can really help drive a fair, clean energy future because it helps us both save energy and save costs so that we can be more sustainable, more affordable, and more equitable as a city. Energy efficiency can make it easier for everyone as an individual to afford the energy we need for our day-to-day lives. It can help save costs for homes and businesses and commercial buildings while also reducing our city's carbon emissions, about 40% of which come from buildings. And it can even help us reduce the harmful impacts on communities and ecosystems in the global south, from which so many of the resources and materials that renewable energy technology needs are extracted. So if you want me to go into the next slide, Cason, I want to show you just a little bit about the energy burden in Chicago today, about what we spend on energy and why we need to consider saving money when we look to our clean energy future. This is a map that the Democratize ComEd campaign put together using data from the Greenlink group. And what you see is that many households, especially on the south and west side, many of these neighborhoods that are in dark green, blue, or purple are spending 50%, 60%, in some cases even over 80% of the households there are in energy burden. That means, I'm sorry, I used the wrong terminology. These are households in energy burden, which means that more than half households in many neighborhoods on the south and west sides are spending 6% or more of their annual household income on utility bills. It's something that's a great strain on families and something we really need to consider when we think about what a just transition to a clean energy future means. But the good news is that while there are things individuals can do, like weatherizing your home or updating your lighting fixtures, the burden for greater energy efficiency and a just transition doesn't need to fall on individuals, because there are a lot of policy options we can consider, which our panelists will be talking more about. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Tessie, I want to give you just a quick overview of some of the things we can do to help promote energy efficiency for both reduced emissions and reduced costs. First, building owners can play a role here by investing in retrofits, renewables, and really helping tenants with energy efficient practices. And already today, the city of Chicago runs several programs that help incentivize building owners promoting energy efficiency, though they're largely voluntary so far. You have programs like the Retrofit Chicago Challenge, which really has a lot of those voluntary programs for commercial, residential, and municipal buildings to retrofit themselves, which means, you know, invest in upgrades that make their buildings more energy efficient to save costs for tenants and reduce emissions. There's also the Smart Grid program, right, where the city tries to implement so-called smart meters that can adjust more readily, you know, and manage the energy flow of an aging electricity infrastructure, as well as the Property Assessed Clean Energy program, so that owners of eligible properties can finance renewable energy on their properties. But at the same time, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Tessine, there's a lot that the city can do, and there's a lot that the city can consider if it's willing to be more bold in helping us get to a just transition. So if you don't mind going to the next slide, we'll just give you a quick overview of some of the policy options at the city level, which our panelists will speak about in more detail. First, there's a lot the city can do in terms of assistance programs, really providing direct financial assistance to residents to help us all transition to more efficient and renewable energy. Can provide city funding, rebates or incentives, and even group buying options where the city provides low or zero finance loans to help groups of residents purchase things like solar panels or retrofits for their building that they all live in together. At the same time, utility policy is a big part of this. Now, the city has what's called a franchise agreement with ComEd, you know, our contract with the company of ComEd to provide the electricity to all of us who live here. And this December, it's actually up for the first time in about 30 years. So that gives the city a chance to really think about what our utility policy could be. They could negotiate a tougher contract with ComEd, a tougher agreement to hold them to higher standards. We could reevaluate relief programs to help people living with energy burden better afford their energy bills. And we could even consider the bolder option of municipalization, which would mean that rather than renewing our contract with ComEd, we would take it over and run it as a publicly owned entity rather than one that's owned by investors. Then finally, there are a number of policy options related to buildings that the city can consider. We can enforce performance-based building codes or other environmental performance standards. In other words, these are things where the city regulates how a building is built or what kind of upgrades can be considered, and set standards that force building owners and those who build buildings to make them much more energy efficient and much more favorable to those who live there, who will then pay less money on their energy bills, as well as to the environment because they'll be emitting less energy and less carbon. Now, that's just a quick overview of kind of what the topic is today, why it's so important for us, for our city, for our planet, but also some of the options on the table for the city to pursue. And what we want to do now is spend most of the next half hour or so talking with our panelists who can get into much more detail about what's on the table and what we need to consider as part of our plan. So if you don't mind going to the next slide, we want to begin by just having each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about them and their work. So we're going to start with Matthew Cason from the Democratize ComEd campaign. So Matthew, in about 5 minutes, would you mind just telling us about your work on Democratize ComEd and what it has to do with the just transition to a clean energy economy?
Yeah, thanks, Pat, and thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Cason. I am the campaign coordinator for the Democratize ComEd campaign. We are a coalition of groups originally started by Chicago Democratic Socialists of America, but who have since been joined by a number of other groups, including the Sunrise Movement, the Edgewater Environmental Sustainability Project, including Water Watch and others, to fight to municipalize and, more importantly, democratize our local utility. As Pat just explained, municipalization is the process by which the city would take over an entity, in this case, ComEd and its electric utility assets, with the ultimate goal of setting up a municipal electric utility that would be run democratically with an elected board that be accountable to the people of Chicago, and would operate as a public entity that would work exclusively in the interests of Chicagoans. And that's the fundamental reason why we launched this campaign about a year ago. The reason the kind of original inspiration for this was kind of looking forward towards the future. We're looking towards the need to rapidly decarbonize the city and everything about it. We're looking towards a present where we have a corrupt and frankly failing electric utility that is not meeting the environmental goals we need and has just been fined $200 million for corruption. People of Chicago deserve better. And three, ultimately, to return control of our energy future to the people of Chicago, where it's been kind of distant and uncontrolled from us for quite some time. As Pat mentioned, we've been under a franchise agreement with ComEd for 30 years. And in that 30 years, we've been very little discussion of what role does our utility play in our energy future. And before that, we actually had a longer franchise agreement that was 70 years long. And now going forward, we believe at Democratize ComEd that we need to take control of our energy in order to build the future that we deserve and deliver full decarbonization by 2030 to facilitate the electrification of buses, as Kyra mentioned earlier, to decarbonize the rest of our economy. Because while we all receive electric bills and we all pay those for our residential usage, and so the building owners pay for their usage, there's large parts of the economy that will need to be electrified, and that will all tie into the electric grid that is all run currently by ComEd, and that electric utility will only become more and more important as we decarbonize transportation, as we decarbonize heating, as we decarbonize, every other activity in life, and much of that will be electrified in the process. And to the kind of topic of today's conversation, like how does this help you save money? Why do we believe that democratizing ComEd will enable us to save money? The fundamental reason is that public utilities, in the sense of being publicly owned and operated, have lower costs, they have better service, and they can directly address the issues that we believe are important to achieve the goals we've laid out here, and that we will be talking about throughout the night. Without that control, I won't say it's impossible. Obviously, there are other options on the table, but we at the campaign believe this is the best option to get there the fastest, to get there the most efficiently, and to save Chicagoans money. We will be able, for the municipal utility, just kind of give an example, we will be able to facilitate the addition of rooftop solar, which is something that ComEd has been somewhat resistant to in recent years. We will be able to support the Department of Transportation and their decarbonization efforts as they install electric charging stations around the city for city vehicles. We will be able to, directly invest in generation so that, instead of having in our current structure, I won't go into it too much, but basically we have to bid for power in the open market. We can directly buy, say, a wind farm in Iowa. And so then we'll know very quickly that this is our power and it's coming to Chicago. But I hope that was kind of a good introduction for kind of what we're doing here at Democratize ComEd, and I will pass it on to the next panelist, who I believe is Hans.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, so next up we have Hans Detweiler from the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. Hans, do you mind telling us about your work and what that has to do with the just transition to a clean energy economy?
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here tonight. And actually, my first question for Matthew is going to be, who's the person with their arm around him in his photo? So I look forward to hearing who that is when we get there. But a couple of things I want to talk about tonight. One, I want to make clear first that the challenge with solving climate change is not so much a general challenge of how do we do it. It's really more specifically, how do we do it equitably? And then specific to that point, I want to talk about a terrific success story that we've seen recently in Pennsylvania, and that I'd be very excited to help bring to us here in Illinois. So first, in terms of what is the nature of the challenge that we face, I just want to be clear that when you look at the basic pieces of solving climate change, all of the technology is already available. So we are not in a situation where we have to wait for the technology community or technology development to solve any particular barriers. We're all there already. So we already know that we can use wind and solar to replace coal and gas on the electric grid. We can use electric vehicles to replace the oil industry. We can use heat pumps to replace natural gas and propane to heat buildings. And we can use efficient design to make those buildings much more efficient. So we know that, that all of those pieces are already there and already in place. The particular piece that I work on is that building electrification heat pump piece. And heat pumps, if you're not familiar with them, you probably have a couple of them in your house already. Your refrigerator is a heat pump, an air conditioner is a heat pump. It's basically an electric appliance that moves heat from one place to another place, as opposed to, say, an electric resistant heater, which uses electricity to actually generate the heat. So because it's moving heat, it's super efficient, and that's why you get a lot of excitement about heat pumps. Anyway, all of those main 4 building blocks are in place. The challenge is, how do we implement those 4 building blocks in such a way that we're lifting all boats instead of shipwrecking boats, right? How do we do it in such a way that equity happens first and not as an afterthought? And with that in mind, I think what has recently transpired in Pennsylvania is really interesting, and it does require just a little bit of background. So there is a federal, most affordable housing that is new construction that is built or that's gut remodeling that's done in the United States is done through federal tax credits called LIHTC, or low-income housing tax credits. And the rules for those low-income housing tax credits are set, interestingly, by the states or sometimes by large cities. Actually, in Chicago, Chicago writes its own rules for these. And so this is good because even though it's federal money, the states and cities have control over how the money is spent. So what happened in Pennsylvania was they did a big stakeholder process to engage a lot of people. And then at the end of that process, they set their rules to highly motivate developers to meet what's called the FIAS Plus standard, which is the Passive House Institute of the US standard, which is an HVAC standard, which basically means that a FIAS Plus building will use only about 1/3 of the electricity that a new built to code building would use. So 2/3 of the energy consumption is saved. And when they did this in the first year, the FIAS buildings, they got a lot of them, and they cost about 2% more than the others. And then when they did the program the next 2 years, on average, the FIAS Plus projects actually cost less to construct than the rest of it. And what was basically happening was the contractors figured out, they got familiar with the technology, they figured out how to do it, and they were able to cut their costs. And what happened was you had housing that's going to use only 1/3 as much energy, but was costing less to construct in the first place, and was making, therefore, sort of great contributions to reducing energy burden in the community of affordable housing residents who are facing an extreme energy burden and greatly need those savings. So I think it's just one example of a good way to put equity first and focus resources on helping communities to make certain that nobody's left behind. And we'll need a lot more of those examples and broader transformation than just through those programs, but I thought it was a great way to start off tonight.
That's great, thank you. And Hans, just to make sure we're all clear, could you define FIAS Plus once more for us?
Oh, sure, sorry. FIAS Plus is the Passive House Institute of the United States. So it's PHIUS. And FIAS Plus is just their certification process. And so buildings that meet the FIAS Plus standard are, as I said, they only use about 1/3 of the energy of code for their heating and cooling.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
That's a great example and a really exciting one that we'll want to talk more about, I'm sure. Why don't we go to the next slide then? And our final panelist today is Margaret Garascia from Elevate Energy. So Margaret, tell us just a little bit about yourself and your work and what that has to do with the just transition to a clean energy economy.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with Hans and Matthew and all of you. So my name is Margaret Garascia. I'm from Elevate Energy. And we implement a lot of the programs that people have been talking about tonight. And we have a focus on serving underserved communities, people for whom it might typically be difficult to access clean energy programs. So we run solar programs, we run dynamic electricity pricing programs that allows people to pay the hourly rate for electricity as opposed to the flat rate. And then we have a host of kind of clean energy programs for buildings. So we do energy efficiency work with a focus on affordable housing. and increasingly building electrification, which is definitely something I wanted to touch on. So thanks, Hans, for talking a little bit about some of the technology and defining that so I don't have to spend a ton of time on that. But what got me into this work was some of the work we've done on energy insecurity, which Pat kind of referenced in his intro. And it's just really striking how many folks, how many of our neighbors in Chicago struggle to pay basic bills. So we went out and talked to people who had applied from one of our retrofit programs. And we actually went into their homes and sat down with them and just chatted about their struggles really to keep up with the gas bill and the light bill. And 90% of them, these were lower income homeowners, so folks who owned their homes, 90% of them told us that they were experiencing at least one of the kind of facets of energy insecurity. So they were juggling their bills. They were maybe not getting their medications 1 month to be able to keep up. They were keeping their home at a really uncomfortable temperature, either too hot in the summer or too cold in the winter or both, in order to keep those bills down. So it just really clarified for me that we have to kind of figure out programs and solutions that work for people who need them the most. And just like stepping back out, over half of the city of Chicago are renters. So if we can't figure out a way to deliver clean energy solutions and programs to renters, then by definition, we're sort of not reaching, the biggest part of the population. Same thing goes with people who live in apartment buildings, right? Apartments, multifamily housing, you might hear it called, is a plurality, if not a majority, of the units and the energy use in the building stock. So when we talk about building electrification, when we talk about energy efficiency, we really can't go the model of a certain tech company that designs electric vehicles that I will not name, which is really, we're gonna sell the luxury product to the high-end market. And then, yeah, maybe eventually it'll kind of trickle down to the rest of us. No, we have to design solutions around the majority of the people who need them the most. And then that's how we're gonna scale out these solutions. So I'm delighted to be here and excited to kind of dig in a little more on a bunch of these topics.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction, Margaret. And so, as Margaret was really talking about there at the end, just what does energy insecurity look like? What does it mean in people's lives? And we showed earlier that map with what the energy burden is like in Chicago today and how unequal and inequitable it is. I wonder if a few of you could just talk to us about ways that you see Chicago really acting boldly to address the energy burden. What do you think really needs to be prioritized most in the city's transition plan that we can get to a fairer future where so many people aren't keeping their homes at uncomfortable temperatures or worrying about whether they need to pay their energy bill or can buy their prescription drugs? Who'd like to begin?
This is Hans. You want me to?
Yeah. Go ahead, Hans. Yeah, I know we started with that one example, but I wonder what else is on your.
Yeah. No, well, I think with a city like Chicago, which has struggled with extreme segregation for a long time, I think it's going to be vital for the city to really engage in thinking about, saving money and saving clean energy at the neighborhood level. Like the conversation needs to start there. And so, for example, one thing that I've seen Mayor Lightfoot do recently, which I was happy to see, was the Invest Southwest initiative, which is, she's identified, I think it's 13 neighborhoods on the west and south sides that are struggling commercial areas that she wants to sort of prioritize for reinvestment. So for example, to have neighborhood groups working in each of those neighborhoods to develop strategies that will work for them and to make sure that their voices are heard as the city does a citywide planning process, I think will really be very important, and will make certain that it's not just a small number of voices that are contributing to the overall plan.
Yeah, I'll add something to that, if that's okay. I think the city can play a coordination role that is often difficult to get them to do. And we talk to homeowners a lot who, say, oh, the city was here a couple of years ago and they helped me with my windows, or they helped me with my roof. And we should really be serving people holistically, right? We should be addressing all of the issues in the home. We should be weatherizing it. we should be signing them up for, a solar program if they're eligible, for, dynamic pricing, all at the same time, as opposed to, Elevate's over here doing one thing, another group is over here doing another thing, and it's not coordinated, and we're not being smart about it. So I think that's a huge role that they can step up and play.
Yeah, and I think just to build off that piece of it more, not just can the city help coordinate and help people, make sure we help them in a holistic way, but the city has the power to really look at the system as a whole and make sure that the system itself is structured in such a way that people can be helped, that both by the city, by other organizations, and so people can help themselves. One example that always comes to mind to me is kind of electric rates. Like, we don't think about that much, but how much you pay is dependent on the rates, and that obviously is a direct correlation to your burden. We've seen other cities like Austin, for example, where they have income-based progressive rate structures. So people who make less money pay less in electricity bills correspondingly. In California, they have a tiered rate structure where if you use less energy, you pay less. Whereas today in Chicago and all of Illinois, we pay flat rates. Other examples are abound, but a lot of those questions of like, how can we actually restructure how energy works in this city to make sure that it's not just like, oh, well, you have to get weatherized because nothing else is going to change. Like, there are more solutions than just that. And we want to make sure that kind of as part of this transition plan, that we spell those out and make sure that Chicago takes kind of the definitive policy steps to make that happen.
So it sounds like we have a wide range of options, from the individual level to looking at neighborhood level strategy and with the city coordinating it, to making systems level changes through our utility. I wonder then, as you think about, there are all these possibilities that we're discussing, what are some of the barriers we face to significant energy efficiency and energy affordability and fairness improvements throughout Chicago? What's keeping us from doing some of this today?
I'll go first, if that's okay. So, I mean, I think funding is one thing. So there's just not enough money out there to meet the need. So someone mentioned voluntary policies, or carrots. I think you really start to you need some sticks to really improve and expand the funding pool at a certain point. So that's one thing. Another thing is just kind of the degradation of the housing stock really prevents a lot of improvements from being made. And that's, Hans mentioned how segregated we are and how disinvested a lot of neighborhoods are. And that's just, it's a huge barrier. You can't even, you can't go in and weatherize someone's home or put solar panels on the roof if the home itself, can't accommodate that. So that's just, we need a massive kind of infrastructure investment into the housing stock and the building stock if we're going to be able to electrify and decarbonize at scale.
And I can go. Yeah, and I agree with what Margaret just said. But in addition, one thing that has been lacking in Chicago and all of Illinois, for that matter, is kind of the deliberate policy to say that this is a priority, that energy efficiency is a priority, that rooftop solar is a priority, so on and so forth. We've seen in California a huge boom in rooftop solar, for example, because the state of California for the last 15 years now has had policies in place that repeatedly encourage solar installation. Now every new home in California has to have solar on the roof. So solar adoption there is massive. Prices are coming down. Everyone has it. There's cumulative effects from seeing your neighbors get, which causes you to install it, so on and so forth. And we just don't have any of that here. There's no rate-based financing mechanism to help make it cheaper for people to buy the solar. ComEd is not super cooperative when it comes to installing solar inverters, so you can sell power back to the grid and actually make your investment back. And there's no mandate to install it in new construction. And those are things that the city has the power to do. And those are things that we kind of need to keep in mind if we want to say oh, we want every third home in the city to have rooftop solar on it. So what do we actually have to do to get there? It's an open question that we need to have answered.
Great. And I'll come back to you in just a minute, Matthew, with a question from the audience. But first, I want to hear from Hans about this question about barriers you see to energy efficiency improvements.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Yeah, I also wanted to pick up on Margaret's comment that carrots are good, but we also need sticks occasionally. And there's one stick that our near neighboring city of St. Louis recently picked up, which is a particularly interesting one. It's called a building performance standard, and it's a requirement that large building owners make regular energy efficiency improvements. So there's a long-term goal that buildings have to get to, it's not quite zero energy, but to a super efficient standard over a 20 or 30-year period. And then depending on the benchmark point that they're starting at, every 5 years, they have to make new improvements to that. And so, building owners that have the resources to make those improvements should be required to make those improvements. But there's also great potential to solve other problems at the same time. So, for example, you might have a building owner where there have been health and safety inspections and violations have been noted, and the building owner is still not making improvements. Well, if a building owner is still not making those improvements and then they're not in compliance with the building performance standard, then they're not going to find a lot of leeway in asking for, say, a variance or a sort of license to make their improvements a lot slower if there's an active tenant committee that's saying, hey, look, they need to make these improvements because they can improve the health and safety of the building at the same time as improving the energy efficiency of the building. So I agree that getting out the stick as well as some carrots is a really useful part. And I thought it was great to see that St. Louis taking the lead with a building performance standard.
Yeah, absolutely. We have one question from the audience, and just for everyone too, feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat. This is our conversation, so you're all welcome to contribute. We'd be happy to get to those questions. So Matthew, David O'Donnell asked in the chat, is municipalization the same as community choice in California? How have California CCAs performed in terms of service equity? And did they have a role in the recent blackouts, or was that all on PGE?
Yeah, just for context for everyone. So municipalization is the takeover of an asset by a city. Community choice, which is also sometimes called community energy choice or municipal aggregation or community aggregation, is basically the ability of cities to buy their own power on the open market. So they can pick their providers, they can negotiate a contract and buy whatever power they want. It can just be open general market prices. It can be like, oh, we want power from this specific wind farm, so on and so forth. And in California, the CCAs, the community choice aggregators, are basic organizations that are formed by multiple municipalities and counties and other units of government to collectively purchase power on the open market. So that is very different from municipalization in the sense that municipalization, you own the assets, either the transmission assets, the distribution assets, or the generation assets. For community choice aggregation, you don't own any assets. You just are picking who you're buying power from. We have it here in Illinois. I'm trying to explain the simplest way I can. We have it here in Illinois. Chicago actually had a big campaign to embrace municipal aggregation, which we called it community energy choice here back in 2013. And we actually ended up canceling that in 2016 under the Emanuel administration because, well, the original impedance for it was to get more green energy. But what ultimately happened was electricity prices were higher, and the program entirely was through what's called renewable energy credits, which are just basically like financial instruments to build future green energy, but doesn't actually use or provide green energy today. So the Emanuel administration decided to cancel that. Another limitation of municipal aggregation or community choice, sorry, just called like 4 different things, here in Illinois is that cities can't band together to purchase collectively. In California, CCAs can represent dozens of municipalities. Here, each city has to do it themselves. And as a result, they can't get as good a pricing on the open market. Yeah, sorry, David. I wanted to explain that for everyone had context of the question. How they performed in service in California. In California, to the prior points, they performed pretty well because they have the power to do so. And they had no role in the recent blackouts. That was just because PG&E didn't want to cut the trees because it was really expensive. So I will pull myself out of the hole and end the question there.
Thank you. And just at a general level, just to clarify too, if I'm not mistaken, California has examples of private utilities like PG&E as well as municipal ones in Los Angeles, correct?
Correct.
And what do you see as the difference in those two?
Yeah, so the municipal utilities in California tend to cover they vary a lot in size, but basically overall they have higher renewable usage. They have somewhat better service. They have equal or lower prices. They don't burn down cities. You know, that's a big plus. And they also provide millions of dollars of additional revenue to their local municipalities. In the case of Los Angeles, as Pat mentioned, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, LDAP as it's called, actually has a bigger budget than the city of Los Angeles itself because it covers the entirety of Metro Los Angeles. There's also a municipal utility in Sacramento. San Francisco owns some of its utility infrastructure and just made an offer to purchase all of its utility infrastructure from BG&E. So that's one set. And then on the other side, you have the more conservative, lower renewable, private investor-owned utilities in California, of which PG&E is the poster child for terrible operations right now.
Thank you. So I'd like to turn back to Margaret and Hans with this next question then, and just ask, you know, beyond things like replacing light bulbs, really, what are some of the long-term implications of energy efficiency for a clean energy future? What do you see as kind of being really the long-term importance of this? Go ahead, Margaret.
Well, energy efficiency is just kind of piece of the carbon drawdown pathway, just first of all. You know, Hans was mentioning heat pumps earlier, and I think sometimes folks don't realize that heat pumps, just because of the technology, are more efficient than combustion, than burning fossil fuels for heat, right? So a gas furnace is going to reach maybe 98% efficiency. Heat pumps are reaching 200, 250% these days. So, I mean, it's the same situation as burning, you know, gas in the car versus a battery running your vehicle, which is just much more efficient. So I think we have to broaden what we mean by efficiency, and we're increasingly seeing states do that in their policy. So we all as ratepayers pay into the energy efficiency programs that the utilities then run to. They have a mandate to, you know, reduce overall load and participate in energy efficiency. But they're measured based on how much they spend per kilowatt hour or per therm that they reduce, right? Other states are moving towards this total energy concept, which means that utilities would be rewarded for things like switching from gas to electricity, switching from a gas furnace to an electric heat pump because of those efficiencies that I mentioned. So it's a huge piece of what we have to do to reduce carbon. And I think we really have to broaden what we mean when we say efficiency.
That's great. Thank you for doing that. Hans, would you have anything to add on that question?
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate the return on focus to heat pumps. And just in terms of sort of how do we solve this problem at scale in the city of Chicago, I think that the existing utility programs, like for instance, if we know that we're going to need to stop using gas furnaces over the next 20 years in order to meet carbon sustainability goals, then why is it that the gas utility peoples is still running programs to incentivize people to get a 98% efficient furnace instead of a 96% efficient furnace? Like, all of that money should be redirected towards heat pump programs, which are the long-term future. And all of that heat pump money should be directed towards low and moderate income customers and communities that are under-resourced, so that, again, we can approach the problem broadly from an equity first perspective and do the communities and neighborhoods first, that we really can't take the risk of leaving them behind. So I think a broad restructuring of all of the utility programs would be super in order. The other thing that I wanted to sort of close with on that is just point out, I talked about the Pennsylvania FIAS Plus using their affordable housing tax credits. So Chicago has the authority to do the same thing if it wants. And I really hope that that gets picked up and that there's a drive and an effort to do that. Interestingly enough, the Passive House Institute of the US is actually headquartered here in Chicago and has a large number of participating architects here. So it would be super easy to do more of that at scale in the city, and in fact to reflect that in building codes and use the building codes to push the envelope forward for the broader market as well.
Thank you for that. So we're getting a few more questions in the chat, and if anyone has a question that you want to make sure we get to, I definitely encourage you to put it in now. We have about 5 or 6 more minutes here before we take a little break to stretch. So this is the time to get your questions in. First, for Margaret, Luke's asking, does Elevate do any work with programming around distributed solar or community solar? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We do. So we are the administrator for Illinois Solar for All, which is the kind of state pool of money for community solar and distributed generation for low and moderate income communities, as well as environmental justice communities. And we have a website. I'll put it in the chat for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Would you mind just telling us, just share a little info about kind of the state of those programs? What do you see as sort of needs and opportunities as we look towards our transition plan that we're trying to shape today?
I think I just echo some of the earlier themes. I mean, we know the technology works. We know how to find partners who want community solar and communities who want community solar. It's really just a scaling and a funding question at this point. I think those are the big barriers there. Obviously, the state having an RPS is the kind of enabler there. So the better that gets, the more community solar we'll have across the board.
And RPS, would you mind just defining that for everyone?
Oh, sorry, Renewable Portfolio Standard.
So that's basically the mix of energy that utilities have to provide, right? Cool, thank you. Hans, let's go to you with this next question. David is asking if anybody's done the cost benefit analysis for businesses, households, local economy, et cetera, of deep decarbonization of all of Chicago's buildings.
Short answer, yes, some of that work has been done. Longer answer is a lot more of it needs to continue to be done. But Rocky Mountain Institute has done some good studies on this in the past. And there are sort of additional groups that are going to do more studies of this in the future. One of the at the national level, one of the sort of best, really interesting reports recently was called Rewiring, by an organization called Rewiring America. And there was a really good synopsis of that published in Vox. So I don't have a handy link, but if you just Google Vox Rewiring America, then that study will come up. And one of the things that that study also shows is the enormous amount of job creation that results from these sorts of efforts. So their estimation was 25 million jobs nationally from a really comprehensive effort to replace coal and oil with, well, the four basic building blocks I mentioned earlier. So replacing coal and oil with wind and solar, and electrifying vehicles, and electrifying buildings, and sort of going after energy efficiency.
That's great. And it looks like Alex threw that article link in the chat if anyone's interested in reading it.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you. And David has mentioned too, there's the Energy Gang podcast has a discussion of it. Renee's got a question, really thinking more about policy solutions for saving money on power while providing affordable housing, like the example you've been talking about, Hans, from Pennsylvania. But really, are there good examples of developments or retrofits in Chicago that combine these priorities and show the dual benefits? And I'd open this to Hans, but also to Matthew or Margaret, if you know any too.
I'm going to let Margaret start first, and then I'm happy to pick it up because I know she's focused on this.
Yeah, so I mean, over the years, we've served, I want to say 40,000 units of affordable housing with energy efficiency, and increasingly trying to reach those units with electrification as well. And we're trying to focus initially on scenarios in which we think there really will be good cost savings to tenants. While I don't have a case study for that yet, because that work is kind of ongoing, what we're trying to do is really move tenants off of their gas bill entirely. So you lose that fixed charge, you lose the variable cost of gas, you electrify all of the end uses that the tenant pays for, you save them money, you improve indoor air quality, the building owner's happy because they have great new kind of technology in their units. It really is like a true kind of win-win. I mean, there's a lot of stakeholders involved, but that's the future. That's really what we're driving towards.
And I'll also throw into the chat a recent project that was done by Lucha, Latin United Community Housing, where they did a number of new units that were just sort of typical built to code. And then they did a number of units to the FIAS Plus standard that I mentioned earlier. And they've been really delighted with the results of that. So I just threw that project up on the chat.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're going to, in just a minute, we're going to throw up a poll for everyone who's here in the Zoom meeting today to participate in. So before we do that, I just want to give you each 30 seconds to wrap up. If there's anything you want to underscore, summarize, anything we haven't gotten to, love just to go to each of you and give you one more chance for a last word. Matthew, I haven't heard from you in a while. Maybe 30 seconds. Give us just one little closing.
Yeah, I think kind of the one thing I want people to kind of take away and think about is that saving money and getting clean energy isn't just up to you. I know we've mentioned in various ways throughout this conversation, but it's up to building owners, it's up to local governments, state governments, federal government, and we can, in this transition plan, really chart forward a path to being able to help us save energy and save money, and kind of achieve the transformation that Ray 400 has set out to achieve, even faster potentially than we've originally planned. And just to kind of stay creative about that, because to prior points, we have technology, we have the methodology, we know what to do, we just have to do it, and there's lots of creative policy solutions that can drive that towards a nearer term conclusion.
Great. Margaret, just 30 seconds or so, just final takeaways for people.
Yeah, I think we all have to be happy warriors in this work, as a colleague recently said. It can feel really daunting. There's a lot of work to do, but yeah, just to echo, we have the solutions. We know how to do this. We know how to kind of start with affordable housing with underserved communities first, and so we have to charge ahead and work together. And yeah, it was great to connect with everyone tonight.
Thank you.
Yes, also fantastic to have the opportunity to connect with everybody tonight. So I really appreciate the invitation. I think that historically in Chicago, we've waited for the mayor's office to lead on clean energy initiatives. And it's just clear that the current mayor is distracted by a lot of other very important priorities as well. I don't want to take away from any of those other very important priorities, but it doesn't look like she's going to make this process of equitably solving climate change in Chicago a priority unless we push. So we're all going to have to find a bunch of ways to push.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think that was a wonderful discussion. Really appreciate all of your knowledge and insights there. Kara, should I hand it back over to you then to put up the poll question and send us into a break?
Sounds good. Sounds good. I think Madison's going to get our poll going. Thanks so much launching that. We just have a few questions. We promise this is not supposed to be like reading comprehension or anything like that, but we wanted to capture a few of the cool facts and things that our panelists shared for us. So the first question is, when was Chicago's agreement with ComEd last updated? Which state updated its building standards to FIAS Plus to drive energy and money savings? And then what are some ways that energy insecurity shows up in our communities? So feel free to go ahead. We are just gonna take a few moments to let those answers roll in, and we're going to move into a break. We encourage you to come back at 7 o'clock. We've heard a lot of things, but now let's actually take some time, let it marinate, and put it into some of our own words. So we're going to use the rest of our time tonight to actually say, what are the key issues we care about as it relates to saving money and saving energy? What do we want to see addressed in this clean energy transition plan for our city? So we really hope that you'll stick with us, because this is, again, more than just education and hearing things. We want to, massage this and figure out what is going to work for Chicago. And we would love to hear it and build this with you. So stick around, go ahead and stretch, and we're going to get started again at 7 o'clock.